They say that when you look into a doll's eyes, it looks back at you. But what if the doll wanted something more from you than just a glance? What if it wanted your soul? And once it gets it, there's no escape. Chapter 1. The Last Goodbye. Kayla Evans' world was shattered after her parents died in a tragic accident, leaving her alone in their old house in rural Texas. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now echoed with an oppressive silence. At first, Kayla thought the odd occurrences, creaking floorboards, whispers at night, were just her mind playing tricks on her. But when she noticed the antique doll on the mantel move, even slightly, she began to feel something was wrong. She couldn't explain it, but the doll's painted eyes felt too real. Something dark and ancient seemed to linger in the house. One night, as she stared at the doll, she swore it whispered, "Come closer." Chapter 2. The Transformation. As days passed, Kayla's sense of unease grew. The whispers became clearer, always urging her to come closer. But one night, everything changed. She reached out to touch the doll. The moment her fingers brushed its cold porcelain face, a surge of ice-cold energy shot through her. She recoiled, her heart racing, but the damage was done. The next morning, she woke up to find herself different. Her hands were small, stiff, and lifeless. Her reflection in the mirror showed a blank, lifeless face. Panic set in. She was becoming the doll. Every night, the transformation accelerated. Her body felt heavier, colder. Her skin took on a waxy texture. The curse was taking over, but it wasn't just the doll. The house itself seemed to change. The walls whispered her name, and shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of her vision. She saw figures, the spirits of the house, watching her, waiting for her to join them. Chapter 3. The dollhouse Kayla's attempts to escape were futile. Every time she reached the door, it would slam shut. She was trapped. The spirits of the house began to show themselves, ghostly figures with hollow eyes, their forms slowly decaying. They were all once like her, living, breathing people who had been consumed by the doll's curse. They spoke in a chorus of hollow voices. "Join us, Kayla. You'll never be alone again." But Kayla refused to accept her fate. She had to find a way to break the curse, even if it meant confronting the dark power that had taken hold of her. The more she explored the house, the more she learned. The attic door, which had always been locked, stood slightly ajar one evening, as if beckoning her inside. As she entered, she discovered old diaries belonging to her mother and father, filled with disturbing details of rituals and occult practices. It seemed her parents had unknowingly opened a gateway to the spirit world, binding the house with a dark curse that allowed the dolls to trap the souls of the living. The more Kayla read, the more she realized the truth. Her parents' deaths had been part of the ritual, and now she was the next sacrifice. Chapter 4. The Whispering Dolls. Kayla's descent into madness was inevitable. The transformation continued, and the whispers from the dolls grew louder. The house seemed to breathe, and the very air felt thick with malevolence. She could feel the spirits pulling her, drawing her closer to them. One night, she ventured into the living room again, where the dolls sat on their shelves, their eyes glowing faintly. As she passed them, they moved, not in the way a normal doll might shift, but with an unnatural, jerky motion. One of the dolls spoke to her in a voice not unlike her own. "Why do you resist, Kayla? You are ours. You have always been ours." Terrified, Kayla tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat was too tight, her body frozen. The more she struggled, the more the spirits in the house seemed to feed off her fear, growing stronger with every moment. Then, something far worse happened. The dolls began to talk to each other, whispering dark secrets about the house and its cursed history. Kayla realized that these dolls were once people, souls trapped in porcelain, their minds lost forever. One by one, the dolls began to move toward her, their faces twisted in mockery. Their eyes glowed brighter. They were waiting for her to join them, to become one of them. Chapter 5. The Curse of the House. Kayla's desperation grew. She couldn't escape. She couldn't fight. And yet, she knew she had to break the curse, somehow. She found an old family portrait in the attic, a picture of her parents standing proudly in front of the house. Behind them, however, was something unsettling. A figure, barely visible in the shadows, with eyes that glowed the same eerie light as the dolls. The figure in the photo was not a human. It was a spirit, a dark entity that had been manipulating her family for generations. The entity had used her parents to bind the souls of the house, trapping them forever within the walls. Kayla's parents had been the unwitting servants of this entity, their lives and deaths a part of its dark ritual. The house was a prison, and it was feeding on the souls of the living, including hers. As Kayla pieced together the story, she realized that the key to breaking the curse was not to fight the entity, but to sacrifice herself. She had to let go, but she refused. She would not become one of them. Chapter 6. The Final Descent. Kayla finally gathered the courage to confront the entity. She entered the heart of the house, where the air was thick with dread, and the dolls surrounded her like a silent army. They whispered her name over and over. The walls began to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, and Kayla felt herself losing her grip on reality. She could hear the whispers of her parents, now ghosts trapped in the house, begging her to join them, to end her suffering. The entity manifested before her. It was a shadow, dark and formless, with eyes that glowed like the moon. It whispered promises of peace, of freedom, but Kayla knew better. It had no intention of letting her go. Her body began to freeze again. The transformation was almost complete. With one final scream, Kayla reached for the doll that had started it all. She ripped it from its pedestal, holding it in her hands. In that moment, the entire house seemed to tremble. The dolls, the spirits, the entity, they all screamed in unison as the curse began to unravel. But it wasn't enough. Chapter 7. The Doll's Whisper. In her last moments of consciousness, Kayla realized the truth. The curse could never truly be broken. The house had claimed too many souls, and now it was hers. The dolls stopped whispering. The spirits stopped moaning. The house fell silent. Kayla's body froze completely, her face locked in a permanent expression of terror. She had become one of them, but it wasn't over. In her final, fleeting moment of awareness, she understood. The curse had claimed another victim, and now she would wait, just like the others, to whisper to the next unsuspecting soul who dared to enter. The house had found its new doll. Are you brave enough to uncover the truth behind the haunted house in Texas? To hear the whispers that call out from the darkness? But remember, once you listen, there's no turning back. The dolls are waiting, and they're never alone.